Hello and welcome to episode 26, the end of season special.
Two podcast agents set out on a mission to gather intel on a movie franchise that has been collecting box office receipts for over 60 years. The journey takes them all over the world without ever leaving their seats. The villains, the girls, the gadgets, they've seen it all. Now they are tasked with leading a debrief of all the information they have obtained. And that, Jay, is a summary of the episode we're about to deliver, which is all about James Bond. So I guess the first question, like we have on the main pod, is what did you remember about James Bond before we started season 1 of the podcast?
I'm going to sound a bit like a parrot here, Andy, because I know I mentioned this a few times on the pod, but it's been about 10, 15 years since I've watched the older Bond films. But going into season 1 of recording the podcast, it was probably those films that I actually remembered more than the others. And it was also those ones I was looking forward to the most. So in terms of what I remembered, it's got to be the iconic Bond villains and glamorous Bond girls. They're the two things that kind of come to mind. But I think they're probably closely followed by gadgets, martinis, death-defying stunts, and the iconic James Bond catchphrase. Curiously though, when I think of James Bond, I don't really think of a particular Bond film or James Bond actor. So I don't know if that's strange or not. What about you?
So I tend to think Sean Connery. And, we've talked about our favourite Bonds, and we'll get into some of that in a bit more detail, but he's the one that comes to mind. But going in, Sean Connery era was where I had most of the good memories. And then with Daniel Craig coming to the franchise, it kind of reignited my fandom a little bit, took it to another level. In between that, the films were a little bit more vague. But going into this podcast experience, as it were, I was really looking forward to kind of filling in those gaps. And also, how do we look at things in a different way? So it was quite exciting getting into it, and also just seeing where my memory has let me down or where I remember things fondly. Shall we crack on? So we'll try and stick to a similar format as we do in the main pod. So hopefully you'll, as you're listening to this, you'll sense similarities along the way. So across the 25 films, we had a total of 96 villains, so just less than 4 per film. We did have some villains appear in multiple films, those being Blofeld and Jaws. And a little stat on Blofeld, he was portrayed by no fewer than 6 different actors. And Bond girls, of which there were many, 77 in total, so just over 3 on average, 3 per film. Maud Adams had the pleasure of playing 2 different Bond girls, plus a third uncredited cameo, so technically 3, whilst the characters Sylvia Trench and Madeline Swan were the 2 Bond girls to appear in multiple films.
We've had an array of artists performing the Bond theme songs, and also a range of different styles as well, including ballads, rock, pop, electro, clash, dance, a whole range of different styles. But only one artist was invited back to do some more, and that was Shirley Bassey, who sang 3 Bond songs across the franchise. Now, the opening credits usually involved a mix of colours, patterns, various models, clues, or scenes from the film. And Maurice Binder is credited with designing many of the early Bond title sequences, starting with the dots in Dr. No, and in fact he did 14 overall. So since Binder's death in 91, Daniel Kleinman took the mantle, producing 8 of the last 9. Incidentally, Quantum of Solace being the lone exception. Now, this is when I usually talk about the body count. So James Bond has been directly responsible for 667 deaths. It's a shame he didn't do 666, Andy, there. And that's across the whole franchise, ranging from a whopping 232 in Spectre to just the one in The Man with the Golden Gun.
So if he'd have not killed Scaramanga, he'd have got that magic 666. Let's talk gadgets, shall we? It's synonymous with James Bond. So we've had Geiger counters, safe crackers. We've gone from radios to laser cutters, from underwater cars to invisible cars. He had some of the finest gadgets and maybe some of the silliest along the way. And, we've talked about them all in the previous 25 episodes for each film. Shall we just talk about some of our favourites now, Jay? Do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, Andy. So jump in if you've got any questions or you want to challenge me on any particular bit. So I'm not a big car fan, Andy, and it tends to be you that picks out the cars in the film. So I'm going to put cars to one side, and I'm going to focus more on the kind of handheld gadgets as well. So when I think about the gadgets, the ones that come to mind is probably like the different watches that he uses across the franchise. And that includes the Rolex Submariner from Live and Let Die, which features a powerful magnet that supposedly can deflect a bullet, or in Bond's case, help unzip Miss Caruso's dress at the very beginning of Live and Let Die. Lastly, the watch also featured a powerful electric saw. It wasn't only Roger Moore's Bond that was lucky enough to have a super duper watch. Brosnan's Bond had an Omega Seamaster professional diver watch, which included a powerful laser, which came in good use when Bond needed to escape from Yanis's train. And make sure you listen to some of our special guest episodes as well, because we've got a few James Bond superfans that pick out that particular scene and James Bond watches, don't we, Andy?
We do indeed. They will be in the archives now. We've been playing them over the last few weeks, so if you've missed any of those, go back and check them out. There's some really good listens, and you get a variety of opinions on all things James Bond, including the gadgets.
So before I pass back over to Andy, I just wanted to touch on a couple of other gadgets, and these are not handheld gadgets, Andy, but I can't really talk about my favourite gadgets without mentioning these two. So the first one up is the famous jetpack from Thunderball. So, which if listeners recall from our Thunderball episode, this was actually a fully working jetpack. However, the US Army never rolled this out due to its limited flight time of only 25 seconds. Now, the last gadget I want to talk about is Little Nelly. Now, Little Nelly featured in You Only Live Twice, and if I recall correctly, this came in parts, and we watched a time lapse of Q putting it together, so it's kind of like his little Meccano set. Now, Little Nelly might have been a small flying aircraft, but it packed a heavy punch. So, from memory, Little Nelly included machine guns, flamethrowers, smoke ejectors, aerial mines, rockets, and heat-seeking missiles. So they're my favourite gadgets, Andy. What about you?
Yeah, some good ones there you've picked out, Jay. I like the simplicity of some of the early gadgets. Thinking about an early Connery film, From Russia With Love, he had the attaché briefcase, which had a load of cool features, but was actually quite practical as well. So it wasn't so in your face and, you know, such an obvious bit of kit. Like later on, I think things got a little bit silly, but this was a really practical piece of kit. And there was also things like there was a cigarette that shot like a bullet or a mini rocket of sorts, and an exploding pen. Two examples where they're kind of everyday items, but they're also deadly. So I like that kind of things. But you mentioned cars earlier. I wouldn't say I'm a car fan, but I am a Bond car fan. And the ones that really stand out is the Lotus Esprit, the underwater car. Really, really cool. But you can't think cars without thinking Aston Martin. And in particular, the Aston Martin DB5. Bunch of gadgets built in, and weapons, and just a really cool car. Used across multiple films as well. Like, for me, the Aston Martin DB5 is the ultimate Bond car.
Yeah, it's the one that I tend to think of, Andy. But I just want to do a follow-up point. The briefcase that you picked, Andy, have you picked that one because it comes with gold coins?
It comes with gold coins. It comes with a folding rifle. It comes with all kinds of things. We spoke about this, I believe, on a previous guest episode, and I tend to agree with the practicality of it. And it goes back to simpler times. You know, it's just a really cool bit of kit without it being in your face.
Yeah, it was. You would say it's more likened to what you'd expect a spy to have, opposed to more of the action films of the later Bond films.
Exactly, yeah.
So we can't talk about gadgets and not mention villains, because villains were also lucky enough to utilise some gadgets as well across the 25 films. So some come to mind include Scaramanga's golden gun, and we see that in, the man with the golden gun where he's pulling it together as well. Oddjob's hat, Jaws' teeth, and Dr. No's flame-throwing dragon tank as well from the very first film. And also an honourable mention, Rosa Kleb's knife shoe, which, Andy, in the notes we put knife shoe because I can't really think of a more better way of putting that in terms of a knife shoe, something a bit more catchy.
Well, this brings back to an old question. Is it a knife shoe or is it a shoe knife? Like, is it a boat plane or a plane boat? I think we'll go knife shoe, but I'm glad you put that in as an honourable mention, because it's one of my favourite non-Bond gadgets, along with the bowler hat of Oddjob. But I did mention we had some silly ones that Bond used or were in the film. We've got a list of them here. We'll pick out a few. So the alligator submarine from Octopussy, that was pretty daft. And also the flamethrower bagpipes from The World Is Not Enough.
Yeah, we've got the boombox rocket launcher from The Living Daylights, laser guns in Andy's favourite Moonraker, and Bond's fake third nipple from The Man with a Golden Gun.
Yeah, and there was also Q's rotating sofa from The Living Daylights, and you can't have a list of silly gadgets without the infamous invisible car, the Aston Martin Vanish, as it was dubbed, from Die Another Day.
Do you have a particular favourite from that list, Andy?
From the silly list?
Yeah.
I hated the bagpipes because I just hate bagpipes anyway. I don't mind the boombox rocket launcher, but again, you wouldn't expect to see a spy with a boombox, so it's not practical. But the third nipple, just not so much the fact that he's got one, but the way he just tosses it aside in that scene just makes me chuckle whenever I think about that.
I agree. When I think about the Man with a Golden Gun, that is probably the first thing I think about. It's the third nipple and how he tosses it.
Yeah, just imagine the street sweepers who find that. It's like, of all the things to find in the garbage, in the trash, whatever you want to call it, a nipple is going to be one of the more stranger items. Let's carry on with our Bond information. So the introduction, Bond, James Bond. I thought it would have been uttered in every single one of the films, but it was actually 21 out of 25 we heard it. Sometimes it was at the start, sometimes it was at the very end, but mostly somewhere in between. The average time taken, incidentally, was 36 minutes and 33 seconds. Now, Bond's drink of choice was, of course, the martini, with the shaking, not the stirring, taking place in 18 of the 25 films. And another staple of the Bond films, particularly Connery, was the hat wearing and hat throwing. It seemed to fade away, though, as the franchise progressed. This was something we've been tracking from very early on in the podcast, but it did seem to trail off a bit. And in fact, only 11 films featured Bond in a hat, with only 7 including a hat throw. So another feature of our main pod is when we talk about our favourite scenes. So for each of the 25 episodes, we each picked out a favourite scene. What were some of your favourites overall, though, Jay?
So, Andy, I'm not going to go into great detail, but feel free to probe me.
That's what she said.
Oh, dear. I didn't mean it to sound like that. But anyway, so I'm just going to list some. So Bond versus Patrice in Skyfall, and that's where they're fighting in a skyscraper at night, and you've got the glass doors, walls, the neon lights outside. It's nighttime. I just thought that was amazing. We got the train fight between Bond and Red Grant in From Russia With Love, going back to basics there. And then the parkour chase in Casino Royale. So they're probably my 3 favourites, or the ones that come to mind, really. What about you, Andy?
So in the main pod, I think I picked out quite a few chase scenes, but the ones that really stand out tended to be the pre-credit scenes, the openings. So thinking about Dalton when he's in Gibraltar for The Living Daylights, Brosnan when he's jumping off the dam in GoldenEye, and Craig becoming a 00 in Casino Royale. All really, really cool ways of reintroducing Bond to the audience. But in terms of favourite scenes, and in this case opening scenes, the opens for The World Is Not Enough and Skyfall were particularly memorable for me. So let's hit you with another question, Jay. So along the way, I asked you how many times you reached for your phone in each film. What was the total overall? Have you done some maths on this?
I've done some maths. Luckily, there was only a few, so I didn't have to use 2. Well, I had to use 2 hands but no toes. But it was 8. And interestingly, Andy, Quantum of Solace had the most phone reaches for me with 3. So I don't think that's a bad total. And when I was looking at this film by film, I went on a good stretch where I wasn't reaching my phone, and I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it was Quantum of Solace. Which kind of broke my good run, so a bit disappointing there. But yeah, I think I was more disciplined than I anticipated before we started the podcast. I thought I'd be reaching for my phone a bit more often. How about you, Andy? How did you fare?
So I thought I fared okay, but when the maths was calculated and the results came in, I actually ended up with 18 overall, including 5 for Moonraker, which, for those of you who have listened to the Moonraker episode, you'll fully understand why that may be, and 4 in You Only Live Twice. So I've let myself down a little bit there.
Yeah, but I think when looking at the stats, I think I can't remember who it's on the Dalton films, but you had a good stretch of not looking at your phone. So it was, I think, some of the older ones, and Moonraker, obviously, your favourite there was 5, which isn't surprising, really.
Yeah, that was a distraction for all the wrong reasons. So just a knock on our society today, isn't it? We've got too many screens in front of us. Maybe we need to put one of them down when we're enjoying cinema. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of what we do here on the Rating Room, and that's ratings. So each week we gave James Bond films a mark out of 10. So what does that mean for the overall ratings? Jay, why don't you kick us off with your summary?
So, out of a possible 250, Andy, I gave a total of 165 marks. Or you could put it another way, an average of 6.6 out of 10. And, as listeners might recall, no film got higher than 9 in my ratings. How about you, Andy?
So interestingly, I'm very, very close to your score. My total was 169 out of 250. So that's an average of 6.76. So in the overall scheme of things, we're not that far away from each other. But I did give one film the magic 10, and I went down as low as 3, so I've got quite the range in there. But it's interesting that after 25 episodes, looking at 25 films through 25 different viewpoints, we've ended up in almost the same position.
I was very surprised when I saw that, Andy, because I know we've mentioned before that sometimes our rankings are fairly similar. I'm thinking about, when we do the special episodes where we focus on the James Bond actors, sometimes we have a bit of variance between where we place them, but largely the scores aren't too dissimilar. So that was surprising that there's only 4 marks difference.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? That's a particular word that your wife thinks we use too much. And speaking of your wife, she's been kind enough to provide her verdict every week. What would you say her overall verdict of all things James Bond is, though?
Yeah, so usually the missus here gives me 1 or 2 bullet points. And what usually happens each week is, after we watch the film, I get a verbal update from the wife. The occasional time she's written it down because she's not given me the verdict straight after the film. She wanted to let it percolate and, come to her. Now, with this one, me and Andy's been working on the script, and I've been nagging the wife to say, you need to give me the wife verdict. And the other night, we were putting the finishing touches on the script, and she texted me, actually, to say, I've emailed you my wife verdict. So I open up my emails and there's a lengthy bit of blurb here, Andy. So I hope you're sitting comfortably. So feel free to jump in, Andy, because it might be a bit of me just talking for, I don't know, a few minutes, but I'm just going to read it. Okay, Andy, so, feel free to jump in. So she said, enjoyed rewatching the films more than I thought I would. Interesting how tastes change over time. Pierce Brosnan used to be my favourite, as I've mentioned countless times in the podcast. But rewatching them now, I found that these were the weakest out of the Bond films. They bordered on spoofs. Glad to put the franchise back on track with the edgier Daniel Craig storylines. However, it still has an element of boy clubs, I'm doing quotation marks, mentality from Sean Connery to Roger Moore era. Especially Skyfall, killing a female leader and replacing M with a man and changing a female operative into a glorified secretary. Tried to claw it back in No Time to Die, making the replacement 007 a female agent briefly, but let's be honest, it didn't last long. And unlike Doctor Who, 007 will always be a male. Her closing comments were, overall, enjoyed watching the films, seeing them through a matured lens, i.e. an aging lady, noticing slight nuances that my adolescent self previously overlooked. So she's put a bit of thought into this one, Andy.
That's quite the lengthy statement, and that's all we've got time for on this week's episode. I'm joking, of course. No, some very, very interesting points there. not really a lot that I can massively disagree with, I have to say.
That's the most conversation I've had with the missus for the last week or so, Andy.
And that's via email, via text.
And that's via email and text, yeah. I mean, when I read the email, there was a couple of things where I know that you agree about the Daniel Craig films about being edgier, and they are edgier, but I don't think Brosnan films were spoofs, and I don't think they're the weakest films. I enjoyed the Brosnan era. I mean, the films, well, I enjoyed Brosnan as Bond. Some of his films were weaker, but and they kind of became a bit more gadget focus and product placement in those bits. But it's interesting getting a female's perspective, isn't it, on Bond?
It is, yeah. And I would say Die Another Day fits the category of spoof, particularly as the film ended. I think it was one of the weaker ones. I enjoyed the Brosnan era more than I remembered, and he was a very, very good Bond. But I understand the comment around bordering on spoofs, and I also understand the comment around it being a boys' club mentality. It very much was early doors. I think we called it out in early episodes. The blatant sexism, the misogyny. It was a bit much at times. I think with Daniel Craig they did redress it to an extent, but there's always going to be elements of that. In terms of the final comment about 007 will always be male, there's a debate, isn't there? Should the next James Bond be female? Should the next James Bond be black? Should the next James Bond be old, or should he be young? Who or what should the next James Bond be? There's going to be a variety of opinions out there, but ultimately, for me, James Bond should be male, and there should be more strong female characters in other films. Rather than trying to replace James Bond, make a character that's better than James Bond. That would be my counter-argument.
I agree, and we touched on this, didn't we, Andy, in one of our special episodes where we talk about next James Bond. But what I'd like to see, and I know they've kind of like explored it, especially with like the Jinx character, introduce a strong female character in the Bond film and then give her a spin-off. You could do that. It doesn't have to be a female playing James Bond. It could be introduce a character, either say the CIA or whoever our partners are, and then do that as a spin-off in the franchise. Yeah,
I think that's a good shout. Female villains could take the lead a bit more than males. I think the point about the female M, Judi Dench was my favourite M. I thought she was fantastic. So I've got no problems with another female M. Whether they live up to Judi Dench is another question, because she was fantastic in the role. But there are ways to redress that balance to an extent. But then, it could be argued that Bond is already defined. So why would you change that? I don't know. It's an interesting one. I'm not going to get into any more detail than that. But there's potentially no right or wrong way of doing things. But some very interesting and well thought out points there.
So you've obviously mentioned the missus a few times during the pod. What was her verdict?
So I see this as a bit of a failed experiment, really, because I couldn't get her to like Bond or really commit to really being involved, despite my best efforts. I thought I was onto a winner with Skyfall, but she just didn't take to it, and she saw a little bit of No Time to Die, and there was a glimmer of hope there. She said she might be interested in future, but I think ultimately we're just going to have to chalk this one up as she's not a Bond fan. She's never going to be a Bond fan. So we'll try again for season 2. So let's get a little bit further into things. So the runtimes. So we talk about the runtime of each film in each episode. Total runtime 53 hours, 28 minutes, or an average of 2 hours, 8 minutes per film. So if you're planning on like a Bond marathon, you're going to need more than 2 full days if you're going to watch them consecutively. Probably want to go for at least a 3-day and plan breaks in between. A bank holiday weekend, start at midnight on the Saturday, get some rest stops in between. You could probably get through it over a 3-day weekend.
We've got some bank holidays, haven't we, coming up soon, actually? which obviously when we release this episode, they would have been long gone.
As of this recording, yes, we've got some bank holidays coming up, and as of when this episode drops, you've missed them all. Sorry, I've got to wait for summer. But, time can be found, I'm sure. Speaking of time, the year where the first film was released was 1962. The most recent one hit in cinemas in 2021, so that's a 59-year window. As of this recording, first film was out 61 years ago. And we started out with pretty much one film per year, didn't we? But the gaps grew over time. 2 per year kind of became the norm during the Moore and Dalton eras. Then we had that 6-year break before Brosnan took over. Now, Pierce cranked out 4 over the next 7 years, and then Daniel Craig took the mantle, but it took him 15 years for his 5 films to be released. And if the rumours are to be believed, the next one's going to be no earlier than 2025, maybe even as late as 2026. So we wait, getting more and more impatiently for Bond 26 to appear.
We never go back to those days, will we, Andy, where they were releasing every year, unless they went for someone that was really unknown and they didn't have any other prior commitments. But I think films now probably take longer to make as well.
It certainly does seem to be the case. I think, the big budget, the long filming schedules that they seem to have, and maybe that's to get better quality. Just take longer to get it right rather than just putting it out as quickly as possible. So it's a shame because the early films still stand the test of time, and they were being recorded on a pretty regular basis.
So Andy, do you recall when No Time to Die should have been released? Therefore, what would have the years to film be if we didn't have the pandemic?
To the best of my knowledge, I believe the original release date was April 2020, which was just after the pandemic hit. So it still would have been a 4.5 to 5 year gap, because Spectre came out in 2015. So there's still a gap of at least 4 years, probably closer to 5.
Okay, he likes to do other films, doesn't he, Daniel Craig? So I suppose when the new Bond is announced, which they obviously haven't announced it as of the recording, I suppose it depends what their stance is as well, whether they want to focus on the kind of like the wider career, not be like typecast as a Bond or action hero.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time. Now, let's move on to directors. So we had 12 different directors across the 25 films. John Glenn has got the distinction of directing the most Bond films with 5. And what was quite fascinating to me is when you look at the first 16 films, there were only 5 different directors in charge. But then for the next 9, i.e. the 4 Brosnan and the 5 Craig films, 7 different directors across those 9 films. Martin Campbell and Sam Mendes were the only ones who were brought back for a second chance. But I thought that was quite a fascinating stat. 5 across 16 and then 7 across 9.
It is interesting, and I just wonder, again, were it easier to get directors then? Were they a bit more, I don't know, would you say prone to kind of stick to making a particular film nowadays, where directors might want to be a bit more varied in terms of the films that they make?
Could well be, yeah. I guess it depends what's important to people. Is it that creative license? Is it the money? Is it the awards? Is it just the enjoyment? I've no idea. But it does mean that you're probably prone to different directions if you're not sticking with the same director over and over again. Or maybe there's a lack of foresight. Maybe the gaps in films mean that it's difficult for directors to plan multiple films because they just, their time needs to be taken elsewhere. They can't wait 3 or 4 years for the next film because they've got bills to pay. Who knows? Yeah,
because I know we've discussed during some of the guest episodes, and I can't remember if we touched on this in our main episodes. They could, they're doing standalone films and not necessarily like Daniel Craig's where they're each kind of interlinked. They could do what like Lord of the Rings did, where basically they filmed all the Lord of the Rings films at the one time over a period. but then release them year after year.
It's almost like record a 10-hour Bond marathon and they just cut it into 5 pieces. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? But let's continue our podcasting mission. So at this point in the main pod, we'd talk about some of the general points and research that we've done about the films. Now, there's way too many facts and figures that we talked about to go into detail here. But I just wanted to call out a couple of things. So one of the things that I found quite fascinating was the various rumours or news stories of actors that we didn't get. So the potential casting. So we almost got the likes of Cary Grant, Noel Coward or Clive Owen playing the part of Bond, amongst many, many others who were rumoured to be interested or were interested in. One note that I don't think we discussed in the main pod, which I think would have been the Casino Royale episode, is Angelina Jolie was mooted as a potential Bond girl. But apparently she not only refused to play the Bond girl role, she said she wanted to play Bond, which is quite the request, isn't it?
It is, and that would have ranked lower than Moonraker on your list, Andy, surely. I wouldn't be on board with that one. And it's interesting that you mentioned Jolie, because you've mentioned her a few times on the pod. Is that your way of just slipping it in that you've, figuratively, not literally, that you've met her? Sorry, that you haven't met her, you saw her.
I've seen her in action, so to speak. That was, of course, the film Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where she met Brad Pitt and stole him away from Jennifer Aniston. But, if she'd have seen me first, how life could have been different. I might cut that out in case the wife listens. But anyway, back to some of the facts and general points. The one thing that really blew my mind when we talked about this was the fact that James Bond is Scottish because of Sean Connery, not the other way around. Now, my assumption was that James Bond was Scottish all along, but no, he was written into the books as Scottish because Ian Fleming was so impressed with Sean Connery's portrayal. That's a fact that will never get old to me. I can't remember which episode you dropped that piece of information on me, but I was fascinated by that one, Andy, because it's just so, you just imagine, because Ian Fleming wrote a number of books of James Bond before they even started making films, and the fact that he's done that is just quite mind-blowing. Yeah, it really threw me when I saw that piece of information. It's one of those you have to check it a few times to make sure it's actually true, but there you go. So Sean Connery influenced James Bond as well as the other way around. But there's all kinds of the research and talking points that we discovered along the way. So check out our previous episodes and we get into some of the detail in there. And also go on our website because we've got the show notes on there as well. So you might find out some interesting stuff that we did for all the research along the way. Yeah, and let us know if we've missed any nuggets of information as well. So one of our other regular features is the goofs and continuity errors. So we've covered a few of these during season 1 of the podcast, and these include things like visible crew, pieces of equipment, continuity errors, plot holes, and many more. But here are some of our favourites. So Andy, do you want to kick us off? Yeah, there's a whole bunch to choose from here, but one that I've called out is Diamonds Are Forever. So there's a scene where Bond is driving a car down an alleyway, but because of the narrowness of the alleyway, he's on 2 wheels, so it kind of flipped onto 2 wheels. And then a few seconds later, the car is on 2 wheels, but it's flipped to the other side and it's on 2 different wheels. And if memory serves correctly, we talked about that in our Diamonds Are Forever episode. And it was one of those things where the way they shot it, they had to just leave it in because they couldn't go back and edit it or something, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right, Andy. I think that's probably one of the more famous goofs, isn't it, in the Bond franchise? Certainly one of the more obvious ones that I can recall. Yeah, so I've gone for a bit more of a recent film. So this is Die Another Day. Now, remember one of us mentioning this in the pod as well. So this is the final fight scene between Jinx and Frost. And this is when Jinx is slashed across the stomach.
and it obviously draws blood. However, later on in the end scene with Bond and Jinx, where they're kind of like pouring diamonds on each other, Jinx's stomach is fine. So that's a quick recovery there by Halle Berry.
Yeah, we've talked about blood quite a few times, haven't we, across the season? But that's one of the more glaring errors. Now, another one from me. This is one that stands out not only from watching it back, but it's one that I've remembered from many, many years ago. And it's a fight scene in Doctor No. And it's where Sean Connery as Bond, he's got his right hand cocked ready to hit the villain, and then the camera angle changes and he hits him with a left. But it's done in such a way that it's not like he's done a fake. It's like they've cut two different scenes together, and it was so glaringly obvious. I'm surprised they kept it in.
Yeah, those kind of things always baffles me, because I know in modern films, and I don't know if it's in all films now, because obviously we don't work in the industry, but they have people that check for continuity, don't they? But things like that, surely Sean Connery will be thinking, I throw in my right hand or I throw in my left hand. How does that just get mixed up? Even in between shots, surely the actor must remember, unless they just do so many reshoots of that particular scene, or it just baffles me, Andy, how things like that get through.
Maybe it was like multiple takes, but they just freestyle, and he just has a scrap. It could have been worse though. He could have thrown a punch and hit a kick.
So, last one for me is actually also from Doctor No, and this is where we see Bond involved in a high-speed chase on the way to Miss Tarot's house. His wheels are squeaking like crazy, but he's actually on a dirt road. Yeah,
car chases and things are quite familiar, aren't they, with the Bond thing? And there was various dodgy things. The green screen things come to mind whenever we think of early car chases. But at this point in the pod, we'd normally talk about the film in a little bit more detail. And obviously, we're not going to go 25 films in a row. We've been through them all, so obviously check out the individual episodes if you want to go into the films in more detail. But what I thought we'd do is just have a bit of a chat about just the process of putting together season 1. So give the listeners a bit of behind-the-scenes look of what goes on at the rating room. So how did you find the process, Jay, overall? Why don't you give us a bit of an explanation into your thinking?
So I've really enjoyed the process for season 1. However, for anyone out there who wants to start a podcast, this is just two average middle-aged men deciding to start a podcast about a year ago. Now, I probably underestimated the level of work that actually goes into making a podcast, and also the commitment that you have to put into it. So it's difficult launching a podcast while you're working, especially working full-time, being married with 2 kids, 2 dogs, 3 guinea pigs, 1 snake. But also, it's not just, me and Andy just rocking up and just say, oh, we're going to record this week's episode. It's the amount of research that goes into every episode, because, me and Andy are watching the films each week, but then, as you know, if you listen to each episode, we just do lots and lots of research as well. And we track various things. So it's all that as well that's really time consuming, and things like the editing, which, to be fair, Andy does the majority of the editing, but things like social media, creating the artwork, making the YouTube videos, TikTok videos, making and updating the website. You've got to then dedicate time to actually record the actual episodes. So each of the episodes are probably on average 2 hours long. Some of them are longer, but obviously there's stuff that we edit out. But then also, on top of all that, we've got to find a couple of hours to watch the film as well. So in spite of all that, I have enjoyed doing season 1 of The Rating Room, and I am looking forward to working on season 2 as well. So I'm looking forward to it. It hasn't put me off. We are making some tweaks for season 2, which we can explain in season 2. But what about you, Andy? How have you found the whole process?
Yeah, season 2 is coming very, very soon. For me, I echo a lot of what you've said there. We've we're doing this as a hobby. Don't get me wrong. We're not making millions yet, but feel free to send us cash if you've got any spare listeners. But we're doing this as a hobby, but we want to make it the best we can be. So we are taking a lot of time and care into doing the best job we can. And if you've got feedback for how we're doing, we take it on board, both positive and constructive. The thing for me that I found quite strange at first was taking notes while watching films, because of course we're not going to remember the films in minute detail unless we've watched them countless times, and in a lot of instances it may be the first time we've watched them in 10-20 years. So taking notes along the way, but then making sure you don't miss anything, I thought it was quite an interesting but also strange process. And the kind of things that were going through my head was, well, what notes do I take? Like, what is it that is interesting to people? What is completely irrelevant? And because we'd never recorded before and we don't know what people are interested in listening to, who knows what it is that they want to hear about? So that was quite strange to get used to at first, but we got into a bit of a groove, and just kind of things that popped out of the screen to me are the notes I took down. And then you mentioned editing process. I find it's difficult, but it's also a good learning skill for me, but it is time consuming. And like I said, hopefully you'll appreciate the effort that we put into this. We try and sound as professional as possible. It doesn't happen by accident, but we do have to put in some time and effort to get the editing process correctly. And there are some pods out there that maybe don't quite put the effort in that we do. I don't like to point fingers, and I'm not going to name names, but you may know who you are.
One of the things that I was surprised about, Andy, was how much I actually remembered about the James Bond films. And not necessarily before we rewatched them, but like I've mentioned before, during the film, when a scene starts and that you think, oh yeah, this is when this has happened, or this is when this has happened. So they're obviously in there still. So I've obviously enjoyed the films back in the day. But I did find that surprising, because I just remember talking to the wife, oh, this bit's good, and not giving spoilers away to it, or this, this bit's silly and stuff like that. I was surprised I remembered that, because like I've said, I've only seen the Daniel Craigs before we'd done the podcast. I've only seen the Daniel Craigs once before, each film once before, but all the others I would have seen multiple times.
Yeah, for me, I've probably seen the Connery ones quite a few times and the Craig ones quite a few times, but in between, maybe once for a lot of them, or twice. And yeah, it was good. It was good looking back and, things jog in your memory, like you said. I think one thing I struggled with was understanding which film each memory came from, because at times you can pick out certain scenes or certain characters, but I can't remember which one came from where. So that was something that kind of had to adjust to. What were some of the highlights for you, Jay, as we've recorded over the previous 25 weeks?
There's been so many different highlights, but I'm just going to focus on two. And it's recording the actual episodes, Andy, talking to you about James Bond. I do enjoy that. And I really enjoy the research side of things. So we obviously watch the film, and then we do the research when we're making the scripts. And I do find that really interesting, because there's actually lots of stuff that we research that doesn't actually make it into the final podcast as well. So we do try to edit in terms of what we discuss. We don't just talk about any waffle. Well, I talk about any waffle, I suppose. But I do enjoy those two bits. My least favourite would be doing all the social media stuff. But I do think the highlights are finding out lots of interesting things about each Bond film. And there's so many things that I wasn't aware of, but doing the research, you find out, like you said, about Sean Connery and the Scottish accent for James Bond. That's fascinating. And there's just doing that research, where especially in our earlier podcast episodes, where we talk about a particular actor, but then we talk about what other films they've done and other bits in their career. I found that fascinating. What about you, Andy? What's your highlights from season 1?
I must admit, I enjoyed reading a lot of your research, and I do have to give you the credit for at least 99% of the research done on the pod. I enjoyed the fact that we're now looking at each film through a different lens. We're not just watching them as fans and then taking a break from reality. We're actually studying them a little bit and picking things out that maybe we never noticed before. And, we're both much older and a little bit wiser than maybe we used to be. So the things we notice now may not have been the things we noticed 5, 10, 20 years ago. And also, I like going off script and just pissing about and trying to get a laugh out of you as well. That's enjoyable to me.
So, moving on to another regular segment is the one-liners and quotes. So there's been so many different one-liners and quotes, and we can't go through them all now. But James Bond is obviously known for his witty one-liners, which often come after dispatching a particular villain or completing a mission. So here are some of our personal favourites. So Andy, do you want to say the first one?
Yeah, so I've picked this one from Casino Royale. Bond has just lost $10 million playing poker, so he's off to the bar. He's not particularly happy. And he says, vodka martini? Bartender replies, shaken or stirred? To which Bond replies, do I look like I give a damn?
Vodka martini. Shaken or stirred? Do I look like I give a damn?
That's a good one. And that one I didn't remember until we rewatched that film, so it took me by surprise. I thought that was quite a different side of Bond. Now, the first one for me is taken from Bond's second film, so all the way back from Russia With Love, and it's between Tatiana and Bond. And Tatiana says, I think my mouth is too big. And Bond goes, no, it's the right size. For me, that is.
But I think my mouth is too big.
No, it's the right size. For me, that is.
That made me chuckle when writing that one, Andy, as well.
Yeah, very smooth there by Sean Connery as Bond. Another actor who had plenty of innuendo was Roger Moore, and that includes the line at the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, where he simply says, keeping the British end up, sir.
Keeping the British end up, sir.
Good old Roger. Now, another classic from the early Bond films, and this is Connery again, and I'm not going to try to do the accent. And Connery utters this after electrocuting a villain in a bathtub in Goldfinger. And he goes, shocking, positively shocking.
Shocking.
Oh.
Positively shocking.
Yeah, the final one from me is actually not from Bond himself, but it's from Raoul Silva in Skyfall. And this may be my favourite quote of the whole franchise. And Bond's sat on the chair in front of him, and Raoul's talking about M. And he says, she sent you after me, knowing you're not ready, knowing you would likely die. Mommy was very bad.
She sent you after me, knowing you're not ready, knowing you would likely die. Mommy was very bad.
I remember you saying that one. You liked that one in the Skyfall episode. I remember you were very happy about that one, Andy.
It's just such a cool line, because it strikes that balance between being humorous but also quite sadistic.
Yeah, definitely. And Raoul Silva was obviously a villain that you enjoyed. Now, last one from me, and it's another classic. So I've gone for some of the classic ones, actually. And it's from Goldfinger again. So it's between Bond and Goldfinger. And Bond goes, do you expect me to talk? And Goldfinger goes, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
That's going to be one of those quotes that every Bond fan will know, and there'll be a whole bunch of non-Bond fans that will know it as well, because it's one of the most iconic lines probably ever.
I think, yeah, if you did I don't know if this game show is available in other countries other than the UK, but you know that game show Pointless, and you go and ask a random, I don't know, say 100 people on the street, and obviously you want to pick an answer that is pointless, but that one is something that would be pretty much like 100% of people or 90% of people would kind of quote when you ask them about a James Bond quote.
Yeah, it's one of those, if the score ended up at 99, it's because they've asked 99 people and one moron. But that's just an example of some of the one-liners and the witty remarks and puns that have made James Bond such an iconic character. Many, many more to choose from. We sampled some in our previous episodes, but that's just a little taste of some of our favourites.
Yeah, so moving on to another regular segment is the book versus movie. Now, there have been a range of differences between the James Bond novels and the films. However, the ones that always come to mind is actually from my very first episode, and that is the Dr. No novel, and it featured James Bond fighting a giant squid during an obstacle course. Now, that's a film, Andy, that I'd like to see. And whenever we've done the book first film feature in the segment, my mind always goes back to that very first episode of doing Dr. No. And just, I think the bar was so set so high, you know, in terms of the difference between Bond novel and the film about giant squids. Because I've not read any of the... Actually, I've read some of the Ian Fleming ones. I can't remember which ones they were. But you just think, oh, is the novels just so, are they like sci-fi or fantasy? And I think that just set the expectation so high on that segment. What about you, Andy? Do you have any comments?
The squid one would be a weird one in film, I think. Now, there's various differences along the way, but the one that stands out is Moonraker. You know, Moonraker's a film that I don't like to talk about too much. That's my least favourite, but it's an egregious difference, and it's basically that Bond doesn't go to space in the book, and nor should he. You know, Bond in space just didn't work in the film realm, for me at least. But that's one of the things that stands out. But what I would say, this section and talking about it each week, it's made me want to go and read the novels. I've mentioned in the past I've read some of the short stories, but not actually read the Bond novels, the Fleming novels. So it's definitely made me want to go back and do that. One of these days I will get around to buying and reading the novels.
Yeah, don't leave it too late, Andy. One of the things about this section is obviously there were only so many Ian Fleming stories that they could adapt into film, and then later on they became like novelizations. So what you tended to get in the film would make its way into the novel, but not always. If you listen to some of the episodes where we talked about Pierce Brosnan, there are differences between the actual film and the novelization as well.
Yeah, it is. We talked about kind of the order in which you do things and how it might change. So when you go from movie to book, how does that differ versus if you go from book to movie? An interesting segment that we brought to the podcast each week. And another interesting segment that I introduced in episode 6 to give a little bit more humour to season 1 was the joke. Now, Jay, do you have any particular favourite jokes that stand out?
Not really, Andy. I'm only joking. My favourite was probably from episode 8. Why don't you remind the listeners or anyone that might have just joined the podcast? I don't know why you would join the podcast on the end of season special, but there might be some people that, you know, just come across our little pod on the various platforms out there. Why don't you either remind listeners or retell the joke from episode 8?
Okay, so for those of you new, welcome. You're in for a treat here, because the joke from episode 8 went something like this. So Bond goes into a hotel or whatever it is, and the reception asks 007 his name. So he replies, Bond, James Bond. To which the receptionist replies, I didn't ask for your middle name, Bond.
That one, even though we've said it in episode 8, and you know I've seen it each week when we track the jokes, it still makes me smile, that one, Andy. What about you? Do you have a particular favourite from your library of James Bond jokes?
So that one would probably be really high up there, but I want to go back to episode 14 for a very silly joke. What is James Bond's favourite pasta?
What is James Bond's favourite pasta?
Mini penny.
I think, you know, that was nearly my favourite one, because I just think it's just obviously a play on words, but it did. Well, I remember listening to that, Andy, for the first time, and it was a funny one. It is a funny one, that one.
It's probably the one that my wife rolled her eyes at the most when I told her.
My wife just rolled her eyes at them all, and it's just like, oh, they're so like dad jokes. And it's like, yes, they are, but you know, that's the fun of them. So if you were going for a casting to the James Bond producers, and they said, oh, Andy, you know, you're tied with, I don't know, Tom Hardy. Tell us your favourite James Bond joke. That is the one you're going to be dropping to swing it your way.
It'd be the Mini Penny. Yeah, that'd be the one. Tom Hardy's got nothing on me.
Indeed.
Are you ready? Let's start the quiz.
To the ultimate James Bond quiz. So for over 5 decades, or 25 podcast episodes, 007 has captivated audience with thrilling adventures, witty one-liners, and iconic gadgets. So from Sean Connery to Daniel Craig, from Jay to Andy, this is a rating room quiz. So this is where I put Andy under the spotlight to test his knowledge. So this is where Andy starts sweating loads in the podcast. But because this is the end of season special, Andy, I'm going to give you a night off. So instead, I'm going to go give you a quick recap on Andy's performance over the 25 episodes. Now, this might be a bit of a sore point for Andy. So weeks 1 and 2 saw a very strong start from Andy, scoring 4 marks in the first 2 episodes. But I wasn't going to have any of that. No, I can't have that. And this was going to be a bit boring, Andy, if you're getting 100% every week. So I tweaked the rules and I made it a bit harder. So I introduced 2 false statements and 2 correct statements. Now, that did work. So my evil plan did work, because in week 3, it came to an abrupt ending and he only got 50%. And I remember you being very disgruntled, Andy, there. So
Livid is the word.
Yeah, so you wasn't happy. So over the course of the 25 episodes, how did Andy do? So you did really well, actually. So over 9 episodes, actually, you achieved 100%. So well done. Virtual pat on the back. And that's very impressive, really. And also what's impressive, Andy, was that you failed. Did you fail or did you achieve? Anyway, however you worded it, you didn't get a nil point once. So that is a little nod to any people out there who like Eurovision Song Contest, because at the time of recording, I've seen on the news that they're talking about the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't watch it myself, but I know about the nil point. So I thought that was a nice little nod there, Andy. So you got the night off, Andy, from the quiz. I've not done one for you.
Thank you very much, Jane. It's good to hear that my efforts are being appreciated here. Yeah, nil point was avoided. But shall we move on to our next segment, or shall I turn the tables and put you on the spot? Because I've actually got a quiz for you.
Are you ready? Let's start the quiz.
Time to test your James Bond knowledge.
Okay, this could be the first nil point that we're seeing on the rating room.
So, as a special treat or punishment, however you want to look at it, I'm going to quiz you, Jay, on all things James Bond. Now, I'm not going to do it in the same manner that you did, where you changed the rules because you cheated me, and it's true statements and false statements. We're going to go quick fire. Now, I'm not going to time you, but we're going to go quick fire because, this is a long quiz. So I've had 25 episodes of you quizzing me. So I've got together 25 Bond questions for you to answer. And this noise you might be able to hear in the background is my trusty notepad, which has the official end of season special quiz, which you have not seen.
I haven't seen.
And
so, because it's quick fire, Andy, I don't need my pen.
You don't need your pen. I'm going to give you the question and you're going to give me an answer. And now you can decide, do you want to know straight away if you're right or not, or do you want me to save the answers till the end?
I think for ease, just tell me there and then.
Okay. And I will jot them down along the way and give you your total score.
Yes. Is it multiple choice?
It's not multiple choice.
Oh, that's even harder. This is like GCSE, where I failed miserably.
In your James Bond GCSE?
Just in every GCSE I've done. Unless it's multiple choice where you get, say, like a 1 in 4 chance. This feels like an exam question.
If you're really struggling, I might give you clues along the way, but I probably won't. So there's going to be a mix of very easy questions, very random questions, and some you're going to have to use your memory, because there may be things that we've spoken about on previous episodes of the podcast as well.
Okay. I hope nothing happens to the recording of this segment, Andy, during editing.
It will be interesting to see how this is edited. If all of a sudden there's a static effect around here, and then just noise of you celebrating 100%, I think things may have gone wrong. But we'll never know. We can do this. So are you ready to answer the quickfire James Bond quiz questions?
I am ready. I'm slightly nervous, Andy. I was unprepared for this.
Well, that's kind of the point. So let's kick things off. Question 1. What was the budget for Dr. No?
$1 million.
$1 million is correct.
Ooh, so I've avoided nil pois.
That's a good start. That's half the battle right there. So, question 2. In From Russia with Love, how does Red Grant kill the fake 007?
He strangles him from memory. In the I remember the setting, so it's like a maze and it's dark, and you've got the Spectre people kind of like watching on the stairs or in the garden area. So I think it's strangled, like wire strangling device from memory.
That is absolutely spot on. I wrote down he used a garrote, but I would accept strangulation. So yeah, that's the correct answer. Question 3. In Goldfinger, what bird is on James Bond's head?
It's a duck, isn't it?
It is a duck, correct.
I nearly mentioned that at the beginning, in terms of the silly gadgets. It was either that or the alligator with Roger Moore in Octopussy.
Yeah, that would have definitely fit that bill. That bill, see what I did there? Okay, question 4. At the start of Thunderball, we see a coffin. What initials are on the coffin?
I don't know that one, so I will just guess as JB.
JB is correct. Yes.
Nice.
Because it's the funeral of Jacques Bouvard.
Brilliant. Nice. I would say that was intentional, but I was thinking it was foreboding of... is it foreboding? Foreshadowing of James Bond.
Indeed. Yeah, that's some educated guesswork there. Well done. So, question 5. Now, in You Only Live Twice, Bond reveals that he took a course at Cambridge University. What was that course?
That was our favourite university course of Oriental Studies. Languages, should I say. Oriental languages.
I accept. Oriental languages is correct, yeah.
Thank you.
This is a good start.
Thank you. I'm surprising myself here.
Let's see if we can catch out with some of these others. So, question 6. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, there's a scene where Bond is waiting for the safe device to crack the safe. And in the meantime, he's reading a magazine. What was the magazine?
That magazine, Andy, is one that you subscribe to, and it's Playboy.
You are half correct. I do not subscribe to such things. There is the internet out there, so if you want to see naked ladies, you can do it for free. Or not, if you're a happily married man, like we are. Okay, 6 out of 6 so far. This is going well. So, question 7. In Diamonds Are Forever, what do Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd use to kill the dentist?
Oh, now. I'm torn between two. I think it's an explosive. If the dentist is the one at the beginning where he goes in the helicopter, I'm sure it's the explosive. For some reason, I think, do they kill someone with a scorpion as well? But I'll go for the explosive. So I don't know if I'm getting confused with a scorpion. But I think if it's the scene at the beginning where the helicopter and they meet someone, I can't remember if it's a dentist in like a desert, and then they meet and then transfer something over, and then he flies away and then the helicopter blows up. So I think it is the explosive device.
It's incorrect.
Oh.
It was the scorpion.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah. That's unlucky, but that's some good deduction there. You just went with the wrong side of the coin. Okay, question 8. The wrestler Papa Shango was inspired by which character from Live and Let Die?
I would just guess at Baron Samedi.
Baron Samedi is correct.
Oh, you slipped in a wrestler, Andy. This in our notes we've got no wrestling references, but you've slipped one in.
Had to be done, didn't it?
It did.
Had to be done. Well, that's some good knowledge there. Let's continue though with question 9, and we're off to the man with the golden gun now. And in that film, who hired a hitman to kill Scaramanga?
It was one of my least favourite villains, but I think he came reasonably high on your list, Andy, is Knick Knack.
I'm going to have to say that's incorrect.
Is it? Is it? Ah.
Well, this is based on a quiz site that I saw online. It's actually Scaramanga himself. He hires the hitman to keep himself sharp. So I threw in that just in case you got some good scores on the earlier questions.
Ah, right, nice. You tricked me up there.
Yeah, but you know, it's revenge for the last 25 weeks. But you're still doing pretty well. So let's continue with question 10. Now, in The Spy Who Loved Me, what is Wet Nelly?
Wet Nelly, The Spy Who Loved Me. That must. Oh. Is that the Lotus, the submarine Lotus?
It is the Lotus Esprit, yes. Correct.
I'm under so much pressure, Andy. I hate these kind of... Well, I hate quizzes. I don't do quizzes. I hate this, Andy. What are you doing to me?
We're only just getting started. We're not even halfway yet. Question 11 is about Moonraker. What costume is Jaws wearing at the carnival?
So this is obviously one of your favourite Bond films, and thinking back to it, it's a... Oh, you're gonna... It's like clown, like a big clown.
Clown is correct. Yes, well done. Question 12. At the start of For Your Eyes Only, we see the grave of Tracy Bond. What phrase is written on the headstone? And I don't mean Tracy Bond, such and such year to 1969. What's the phrase that's written on the headstone?
Is it, we have all the time in the world?
It is exactly that. Yes,
Really?
well done.
That was... I didn't know that one. And when you said that, I'm thinking, I haven't got a clue. But now I'm thinking, there must be some kind of Bond, nod to Bond, or, you know, some kind of nod to the franchise. So, nice one.
Yeah, that's some good deduction there. So, the halfway point now with question 13. Octopussy faced competition from Never Say Never Again. What year were both those films released?
I don't know, just because I don't know film years, just because, you know, when we do our episodes and when you reference a film that we've watched, you know, in previous weeks, and you just roll out the years. So if I'm guessing, I'd just say 1983 as a guess, purely a guess.
Purely a guess.
Yeah.
It's a very good guess.
Is
1983 is correct, yes. This is going pretty well for you and not so much for me, but I'm enjoying it nonetheless.
So Andy, are you saying, I know this could be jumping, you know, getting ahead of myself, but is it worth me and you going on to Mastermind and picking James Bond as our subject? I could do James Bond, but you would have to do every other question, like general knowledge and whatever questions they do in Mastermind.
Well, they do a general knowledge round, don't they, as well? I'm thinking we could probably do junior Mastermind level.
I think, yeah, that's fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, have to get rid of the beards. So, question 14. When Bond goes to Zorin's thoroughbred sale in A View to a Kill, what alias does he use?
I don't know. I don't think I can pronounce it right. It's something like John Smythe or St. John Smythe or St. John Smith. I'll accept that. James St. John Smythe. It's spelt St. John Smythe, but he pronounces it St. John Smythe. Yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
So, question 15. In The Living Daylights, Necros infiltrates the safe house, disguised as what?
My wife's favourite, the milkman.
The milkman, indeed, yes. Correct. Father of many, many children. Sure. Now, this should be a nice, easy one. Question 16. At the start of License to Kill, who's getting married?
Oh, such a sad film. So it is Felix Leiter and his wife-to-be, who I can't remember what her name is.
Yeah, she's not important. Felix Leiter is, though, and that's the correct answer. Now, question 17. I want you to go back to our GoldenEye episode of the Rating Room. We discussed Sean Bean and how he dies many, many times on screen. How many times did we say in that recording, how many times did we say that he'd been killed on screen in total?
I don't recall, just because I mentioned about, I'm sure I'm losing my mind and my memory. It's pretty much every film, so I'm going to just... Have you got an exact number?
I've got an exact number, and I worded the question that way because it's what we said at the time.
Okay.
He may have been killed many times since, or we may have missed things out, but our research gave us a number. We definitely said it on the episode.
Okay, so I don't recall, so I'm just going to guess. Can I pretend my screen's frozen while I quickly open the show notes and look at the answer? I'm going to say 12 times.
I can't accept that, Jay, because it's way out. It's 23 times.
23, I was going to say in the 20s as well, but I thought, oh, that's too many.
You've ended your streak. You're on a really good run there of questions getting correct, but you've got a chance to get back on track here with question 18. What was the original title of the film Tomorrow Never Dies?
I don't know that one. I can't even hazard a guess.
No
Did
guessing?
we mention that in the episode, or is that something you found in your research? It doesn't ring any bells.
I think
that
it's
one.
both. I think we did mention this in the episode. Yeah.
What is it?
It is Tomorrow Never Lies.
Ah, of course it is. Yeah, we do talk about it. Ah, I'm gutted.
It's okay. You've still got time to redeem yourself. Question 19. In The World Is Not Enough, who is the bodyguard / driver of Zukovsky?
Ah, so this is one of your high-rated films. Now, that's Robbie Coltrane, so from memory, that would be Goldie.
Goldie is his quote-unquote real name. Can you remember his character name?
Oh, yeah, I do. Mr. Bullion.
Mr. Bullion is correct.
Nice. Ooh. Tough there, making me say his real name and character name.
Yeah, rules is rules. I mean, if the rules don't work, we just change them, don't we, Joe? Well, let's move on to question 20. In Die Another Day, what's the colour of Jinx's bikini when she emerges from the water?
Oh, I'm torn between two, and I don't know. Well, both of them could be wrong. I'm thinking like an orange, like coral kind of colour.
Orange, final answer?
Yes.
What was your other one you were torn?
Yellow. I would have gone for like a yellow, like a Goldie tan, that kind of colour.
Oh, interesting. Orange is correct. Correct. I'm surprised you had to think so much about that. I'm sure that would have been a scene that many people have studied in great detail. But anyway, question 21. Let's get into the Craig era now. So in Casino Royale, who is given the alias Miss Stephanie Broadchest?
I'm guessing Vesper.
Vesper is correct, yeah. When they go to the hotel, I believe Bond is Mr. Arlington Beach, and he's got Miss Stephanie Broadchest.
Nice.
Accompanying him.
That's obviously when he goes more upmarket, where they go to the first one and then they go to another one.
Yes, I think that's right.
Is it?
No. Isn't that Quantum of Solace where he does that with Strawberry Fields?
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Oh, yes, because when it's Vesper, he says his name, doesn't he? Instead of using an alias when he checks in. That might be a different bit, but yeah.
The name's Bond, but it's under or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, good knowledge there, Andy, about Strawberry Fields.
Good memory there. So, speaking of Strawberry Fields, we're on to the film Quantum of Solace for question 22. Now, Quantum of Solace is the shortest film in the franchise. How long was it?
Oh, Andy, this is hard. It's 1 hour, and I'm thinking it's the 1 hour 40s. Now, I don't know whether it's 1 hour 42, 43, 44, 45. Or it could be none of those. But I'm going to go for 142.
It's 1 hour 46.
I knew it wasn't 150.
Or at least it is according to our
Yes.
Maybe there's a version out there where they cut 4 minutes out. But our official notes, which is now the official source of James Bond Truth, says 1 hour 46. So, question 23. In Skyfall, where does Bond meet Q for the first time?
In a art museum or an art exhibit.
I might accept that. Can you be more specific?
You want me to name the actual building?
It is an art gallery, but it's quite a famous one.
Oh, the British Art Gallery.
I'm gonna give you half a point for that. It's the National Gallery.
National Gallery. I've never been there, Andy.
I think I went there on a school trip once. It's very good.
Nice.
I recommend it.
Did you meet any men with gadgets?
I did not. No, there was no like mysterious messages under a newspaper or anything like that. Anyway, back to the quiz. The penultimate question now. Question 24. In Spectre, Bond utters the Italian phrase "Io sono Topolino." What does that mean in English?
Is this the bit where he mentions something like Mickey Mouse when he's talking to the guard on the door, and then when the guard comes to him later on, he kind of mutters the same kind of name?
So what's the phrase then?
Oh, I can't. It's like the password is like Mickey Mouse. I can't even remember.
I'm going to give you a point there. I'm going to give you that.
I remember it's a Disney character.
The phrase is "I am Mickey Mouse."
I am Mickey Mouse.
Yeah. Topolino being Mickey Mouse in Italian. But yeah, I'll give you that one. And then final question. In No Time to Die, Mathilde has a stuffed animal called Doodoo. What type of animal is it?
Oh, Andy, that one's hard. You would imagine it's like a teddy bear because she's a child. But I'm thinking, for some reason, either an elephant or a rabbit. So I'm going to guess a rabbit.
Rabbit is correct. There's some good guessing going on here.
Nice.
So I'm going to add up the scores.
Quick math.
A slight pause in proceedings. You've done very, very well, it has to be said there, Jay. So excuse me while I go through my official notes.
Shall I be quiet so you can play some jingle music at this segment?
Okay, you ended with a score of 19.5 out of 25 for 78%. That's a good effort.
Oh, so going back to our school days, Andy, because I'm sure I never got 78%. Would that be a high B or an A? Would you imagine?
That'd be high. Yeah, was 80% the A threshold?
Oh, I wouldn't know, Andy. I didn't get nowhere near there at school.
I can't remember. It depends what. I think for A levels it might have even been 70 for an A.
Now I'm pleased with
Maybe
that, Andy, considering you surprised me. So I couldn't get any kind of last minute exam prep. You know, when I was at school, when my parents would say, "Are you revising?" I'd be like, "No, I'm not revising." And then the day before, you start revising. So I didn't get any of that, Andy. So I'm happy with 78%.
That's a good effort. Yeah.
I might go afterward because, it's quite late. It's 10:15 in the evening. Once we finish recording, I might go upstairs and wake their wife up and say, I've got 78%. Shame it's not 69, isn't it? But never mind.
Yeah, there's no chance of you getting a 69% on this quiz. The maths wouldn't allow it. So it is getting late, Jay. So shall we call a halt to proceedings here. We'll say this is the end of part 1, and we'll come back for even more end of season special frivolities in part 2, which will be out very, very soon. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon right here on The Rating Room.
The Rating Room.